Thank you for joining this session today. My name is Shalini Joshi, and I'm Program Director at Midan, a global nonprofit that focuses on improving the quality of online information. This session is titled When the Facts Go Offline, Information Blackouts During Internet Shutdowns. The session is organized by Midan and Access Now. Access Now needs no introduction here at RightsCon. It is a nonprofit with a mission to defend and extend the digital rights of people around the world. Access Now supports programs including RightsCon and produces an annual index of internet shutdowns, something that I'll also be referring to later in the conversation. In this session, we are focusing on internet shutdowns and their impact in the Asia-Pacific region. And we have speakers who represent different countries in the region that have experienced internet shutdowns and disruptions. There has been a sharp rise in internet shutdowns in Asia, and that has been quite alarming. As per the definition developed by the Keep It On Coalition, an internet shutdown is an intentional disruption of internet or electronic communications, rendering them inaccessible or effectively unusable for a specific population or within a location. Often this is to exert control over the flow of information. So an internet shutdown happens when someone, which is usually a government, intentionally disrupts the internet or mobile apps to control what people do or what they say. Democracies like India, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, and many others in the region are prodigious offenders. And so are Asia's more repressive regimes like the military regime in Myanmar. Governments have often offered real and imagined threats to national security and electoral processes as reasons for shutting down the internet, even though there is no evidence to show that internet shutdowns have resulted in reduced violence or control the spread of misinformation. Last year, in 2020, Access Now documented at least 155 internet shutdown incidents around the world in 29 countries. In the year of the COVID-19 pandemic last year, and as more and more information and basic services, opportunities, a lot of health-related services moved online, the shutdowns have negatively impacted citizens by hindering access to healthcare, education, and often life-saving information. India has topped this list with 109 shutdowns in 2020. Myanmar has also witnessed one of the longest shutdowns affecting communities in the Rakhine and Chin provinces. And after the coup this year in February, the military has severely restricted access to the internet, further stifling access to information in a country that has faced violence and political instability. In Indonesia also, the government has shut down the internet in Papua and West Papua provinces to silence protests taking place in these regions. So what are the consequences of these shutdowns on people's lives? How do these impact the work of human rights activists, fact checkers, and journalists? What are some of the strategies to mitigate the impact of shutdowns? These are some of the questions and issues we are hoping to address during this session. Let me begin by introducing the speakers and the panelists that we have here today. We have here Ramanjit Singh Cheema. He's the Senior International Counsel and Asia Pacific Policy Director at Access Now. Thanks for joining us, Raman. Raman will make opening remarks about internet shutdowns and the spread of misinformation. We also have here Tai Tai Ong, who's the Executive Director at Myanmar ICT Development Organization, or MIDO. MIDO focuses on ICTs for development, internet freedom, and internet policy advocacy in Myanmar. Tai has been involved in Myanmar's internet propagation events since the introduction of the internet in Myanmar and is also a digital security trainer for human rights defenders. We have Kritika Goyal, who's associate editor at The Quint and leads its fact-checking team, WebGoof. The Quint is an independent newsroom in India. It strives to appease through its unbiased looking glass. In the process, it constantly questions status quo, sparking relevant conversations along the way. Kritika covers misinformation and disinformation with a special focus on politics and breaking news stories. And she has worked as a journalist before she joined the Quint. We also have here Vayu Dhyatmika, who is the editor-in-chief of Tempo magazine in Indonesia. In 2015, Vayu led the Panama Papers reporting in Indonesia. In 2018, Vayu was involved in the creation of Check Factor, which is a collaborative fact-checking initiative. Vayu believes in journalism as a conversation between the public and the newsroom, and that is why he's always excited to experiment with different forms of citizen reporting in various digital platforms to find a better way for journalism to serve the public. Thank you very much, Kritika, Tai, and Vayu for joining us here. And we'll start the session now. And at the beginning, I'd like to request Raman to make opening comments about internet shutdowns and misinformation in the region. So over to you, Raman.
Thank you so much, Shalini. And I just wanted to say good afternoon to all of you here at RightsCon or viewing this later recorded form or elsewhere from New Delhi. As Shalini mentioned, I lead the Asia Pacific work at Access Now, and I also coordinate different areas of our global work, of which internet shutdowns has become an increasingly active area of work and unfortunately a large amount of work, particularly from the Asia Pacific region, because a large number of the world's internet shutdowns take place out of the Asia Pacific region. More specifically, it's important to focus on what Shalini mentioned in terms of understanding what shutdowns are. Shutdowns are the intentional disruption of internet communications. It could be a total shutdown. It could be slowing down of internet traffic as a whole. It could be targeting of particular apps and services in a large systemic way. If, for example, those apps or services are critical to communication flow in a particular country, for example, messaging apps or certain forms of social media. But it essentially represents an intentional effort by a government agency, whether a federal government, state government, police actor, or somebody else in power, normally supposed to have limited ability to restrict speech and expression, choosing to shut down the entire internet or restrict access to it. We run the Global Keep It On Coalition, which tracks and advocates for against internet shutdowns. It helped develop the definition of internet shutdown that Shalini mentioned, which in fact was an outproduct of a previous RightsCon San Francisco a couple of years ago. And we have tracked regularly with the Keep It On Coalition, which has several organizations, activists who are members of it globally, keep track regularly about the number of shutdowns that occur. And I thought it's useful to have a sense of the data there, what takes place. And it's important to note that internet shutdowns are significantly have been growing, although we notice a trend more recently where the total number of shutdowns has reduced a little bit, but the intensity of the shutdowns has continued. And to give you data to help color this, in 2020, the Keep It On campaign documented at least 155 internet shutdowns in 29 countries, of which the world's largest number of shutdowns, the world's worst perpetrator of internet shutdowns, was unfortunately the Republic of India, with nearly 110 plus shutdowns being ordered by the Indian government itself or by state government agencies across the breadth of the Indian Republic. Some of the most intense internet shutdowns in 2020 were also located in the Asia Pacific region, specifically the long internet shutdown from 2019 into 2020 for Jammu and Kashmir in Indian administered Kashmir, and the Rakhine and Chin internet shutdowns in Myanmar. You notice this trend from 2020 into 2021 that we have documented in more recent data that we've just published on the Keep It On campaign that talks about the fact that internet shutdowns seem to be becoming longer and seems to be becoming systemic in certain ways. In particular, we've noticed a couple of common trends. One, long internet shutdowns in certain regions extending from 2020 into 2021, particularly, as I mentioned, in Jammu and Kashmir, which continues to have internet shutdown restrictions in much more localized pockets across parts of the wider Union territory in the current Indian administrative setup, but also shutdowns elsewhere in India, but continuing to happen in that particularly problematic area. You see shutdowns, as you know, continuing to happen in Myanmar. The shutdowns were lifted in Rakhine and Chin temporarily at the beginning of the military coup, but soon followed by nationwide shutdown, throttling, and nearly institutionalized internet shutdowns now, with mobile internet nearly completely switched off. Fiber services disrupted earlier, now restored, and the military junta moving to normalize shutdowns by keeping internet shutdowns restricted for all people by whitelisting certain services such as banking or financial operations. So they continue running during the shutdown for banks or for political elites, but everyone else continues to suffer. You see a trend of platform shutdowns to mar elections and to control information. But the other trend we notice as particularly relevant to this region is shutdowns during protests. Again, something we notice in the context of India, Myanmar, but also something that has come up often in the context of Indonesia, sometimes also related to elections or political activity. I did want to note that there's often a justification made for shutdowns that they help combat disinformation. Not to overstress the role of India, but for example, if you saw comments made by Indian ministers to parliament, they said, oh, shutdowns are part of our standard operating procedure, our toolkit to combat rumors and disinformation that might lead to potential communal violence or other security incidents. And it's important to critique that. And that's one reason why, of course, we had this fantastic session and panel. But I did want to share the words of Irene Khan, the UN's current Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression and Opinion, who has just published an advanced copy of her report on the topic of disinformation and freedom of expression. This is now available on the website of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights for OHCHR. And what they note there, of course, is that courts have ruled against governments that have tried to claim that shutdowns are helpful to combat misinformation, with the example of Indonesia, where the Jakarta Administrative Court ruled against Indonesian government-ordered shutdown in Papua and West Papua last year. You have seen the UN Special Rapporteur go on a limb to state that it's important to note that shutdowns violate the standard of necessity and proportionality in international human rights law that restricts how states can intrude upon our protected rights to free speech, expression, and other internationally protected human rights. But more importantly, and I would quote here from the advanced report, it hinders voters from accessing information about elections, human rights defenders from documenting and sharing human rights concerns, and journalists and the media from reporting of issues of public interest. By depriving people of information sources, internet shutdowns do not curb disinformation, but rather hamper fact-finding and are likely to encourage rumors. In many cases, they appear to be aimed at silencing minority voices and depriving them of access of vital information. And this is something we hope is adopted by the UN Human Rights Council in its current session from June into July. And more importantly, I think as the session will make out, you need to carefully assess any government justification of shutdowns. We believe in general that they are never justified, but particularly this more insidious argument that shutdowns help combat misinformation appears to not be borne out by voices on the ground, human rights experts, and that requires us to push back nationally, regionally, and in international human rights bodies. And that's something I hope the RightsCon community can take forward, and I look forward to further discussion on this to my co-panelists. Back to you, Shalini.
Thank you, Raman. Thank you. And I think this is a great way to frame the session. I wanted to go to Tai first. Raman, you already talked a little bit about what's happening in Myanmar. Tai, if you can talk about how the military junta's efforts to shut down the internet or access to social media platforms, how has that affected the lives of citizens and the operation of the press in Myanmar?
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining this session as well. So Myanmar, we are not stranger to internet shutdown because the government and the military has been using it as a weapon of oppression since 2007, and we had also experienced the longest internet shutdown in areas specific such as Rakhine and Chin. And right now, since the coup on February 1, internet shutdown had happened in a more complex way, and and we are still experiencing right now. So internet was shut down moment. So for this military coup, internet was shut down momentarily on the morning of the coup, and followed by a comprehensive and a heavy shutdowns after that. So because of that, of course, access to information has become a huge issue, particularly in the time of the coup, and also in the process, in the protests, where a lot of the protests and the anti-coup movement are heavily cracked down with violence. So it definitely impacted, the people's ability to access information. Another thing is, one interesting, thing is, although the military had tried to shut down the internet in various ways, like for instance, imposing internet curfews at nighttime, or shutting down of mobile internet, because so that preventing a protester from communicating and using, and also banning of social media platforms, and so on and so forth. So despite all of this, one thing is the military actually learned that it's a very have a big impact of shutting down the internet entirely is actually not longer really possible, and then started to whitelist a few banking on financial applications, and so on and so forth. And then people also have been trying to find creative ways to actually come up online. And from some of the statistics, like for instance, when Facebook was banned, normally there are 25 millions of active Facebook users for Myanmar daily. But with the ban of the platform, we find that there are still about 10 million of daily users on Facebook. So it means that people had to go through crash courses on how to use the internet in a way. So I would like to point out that although the military is trying so hard, the people have outsmarted and try to find ways to actually get around, but still a lot of majority populations, particularly the populations from the ethnic areas, and also are actually striving to get the information. And in terms of media, because after the coup, a few weeks after the coup, some big media houses has been revoked of their license, but then although some cease to operate, some are still operating on their Facebook platforms and providing daily news. But then on the other hand, getting information, getting news from the ground is becoming much more difficult, because of not having the sources, not having internet, and so on and so forth. So actually journalists are also facing a lot of difficulties in time of getting information sources, and also getting right information out to the public as well. So in terms of also for me though, because we also run a fact check platform as well, so it's also very difficult for us to get accurate information in terms of in our work of providing fact check articles as well. So yes, we have a very big impact on access to information, but somehow there are people are managed to outsmart a lot of all these hurdles. And then another one is the military actually can't afford to close the internet for a longer time, so they are trying to find different ways to do that. But like I mentioned, people are still trying to outsmart it. And on the other hand, the journalists, the fact-checking organizations in the country are also trying to operate in this situation. And but then at the same time, getting information, getting sources, getting accurate information out to people are, of course, are getting very, very difficult in this time.
Thanks, Ty. Um, and I think that it's encouraging to also see how people are managing to access information, put out information in Myanmar, even during periods of the shutdown. I'd like to go to you now, Kritika, and ask you about the situation in India. Thai talked a little bit about protests in Myanmar and how during the protests, the internet has been shut down. We've seen something similar in India as well. Last year in 2020 during the farmers' protests, also in early 2020 during the protests related to the Citizenship Amendment Act, we saw internet being shut down even in places like Delhi. What was the impact of that on your work as a fact checker? Did you see more misinformation trending online in those periods, and how did you address that situation?
So firstly, thank you so much, Shalini, for having me on this panel. I want to specifically about India. Of course, we've seen that whenever there've been protests, there've been instances of violence. There've been internet shutdowns, and as Raman correctly pointed out, and Access Now has really well documented that Jammu and Kashmir in 2019, after the abrogation of Article 370, saw one of the longest shutdowns in India. So I think what happens in such a case is that it leads to information blockade, because information is not coming out of that area. I think it, instead of curbing misinformation, it fuels misinformation and disinformation, because you're not able to get any sort of information from that place. You're not able to get verified, authentic information from what is happening on the ground. As an example, in August 2019, when this abrogation happened, at that time there was a narrative which was formed by almost everybody, including the government, which said that the situation in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir is absolutely normal and people are happy with the decision. Also, because there was an internet shutdown, it was difficult to get the information out of Jammu and Kashmir. So it became very easy for everybody to believe that everything is hunky dory, everything is fine, people are happy with the decision. But I think it was as late as February 2021 is when 4G was restored. 2G was restored a little before that, but 4G was restored only in February 2021. In fact, the ban the internet shutdown, or the ban which happened on internet services in Jammu and Kashmir, was not just restricted to internet, but there was also a ban on landlines. So you're effectively breaking communication. You're effectively putting a stop to communication. Again, I mean, to come to 2020, because we've seen violence in 2020, and then something similar happened in 2021 on 26th of January during the farmers' protest. So we've seen all of these instances. We've seen where internet has been shut down. So just to answer your question in one line, no, I don't think so that there is a decrease in misinformation. In fact, there was a lot of misinformation even after this 26th January incident. We saw a lot of people saying, online and offline, people saying, relying on clips from what happened at the Red Fort, saying that the farmers or the protesters or people who entered Red Fort, they were raising Khalistan flags. So I think when you block communication, when you stop people from being able to tell others what is happening, it effectively cannot curb misinformation, because then you believe whatever you hear, and you tend to believe rumors as well. So yeah, that's what I have seen in my experience of fact checking in the last 2 years.
Thanks, Ritika. That's absolutely correct. And I agree that when there is no information coming from the ground, whatever you hear and see is often quite distorted and manipulated. And it's even more difficult for people to access credible information. Vayu, we'd like to know from your experience of working in Indonesia and also as someone who's been working on misinformation, on addressing misinformation, human rights issues, especially in Papua and West Papua. What has been your experience of internet shutdowns and how have you addressed that?
Thank you, Salini. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are. I think, first of all, thank you for having me on the panel. I think it's a very important topic. And I think what happened in our respective area of the world represent a trend, a worrying trend from governments and authorities. Just like what Kritika said just now, this is a new methods by governments and autocrats to block communication, to prevent people from exchanging important information. I think that's a very worrying trend, and we need to find ways to go around that and find a solution. I'd like to share some of the experience that we have in Papua, in Indonesia. I prepare a short slide, maybe that will help explain what I'm trying to say better with writings. So first of all, as a background, maybe some of you don't really follow the situation in Indonesia. Internet shutdown is a new thing. It's just beginning in 2019. It was first introduced in May 2019 after a riot happened in the capital, just after the election result was announced. Again, the same argument was used here, just like in Myanmar and India. The government blocked social media and chat application, arguing that it's important to prevent misinformation and disinformation. And I will tell you later how that really affect fact-checking. So it creates an opposite outcome for exchanging of credible and important information. Instead of blocking misinformation, it creates a more widespread misinformation and disinformation for ordinary people. But the latest case happened, that's what Salini mentioned, in Papua, August in 2019. Again, the pretext was riot across the province. And then this has happened quite long, for days, until I think 1 month in Papua. And of course, after that happened, there's a lot of protests all over the country. People are protesting the situation, and they want to see changing policy on internet freedom in Indonesia. And people see it, this is a direct threat to freedom of expression and freedom in general in Indonesia. But to give you a more full picture of what happened, Papua has been always a conflict area in Indonesia. The conflict there has been simmering for years, since 1960s. The riot itself in 2019 was triggered by racist remarks made by police, by the law enforcement agencies to the Papuan student in Surabaya. And then the racism then protested by the Papuan community all around the country, and they create demonstration in many cities, but the biggest demonstration was in Papua, and that very demonstration led to these riots that used by the government as a pretext to block the internet. So the underlying cause here is the racism that still exists in many parts of Indonesia towards the Papuan. This is one example of the incident there, but we also at Tempo Magazine, we published this incident widely, and I think that helped create public debate around the fate of Papuan and racism in our society. The problems after the internet shutdown, as I said earlier, fact-checking was unable to perform because we need to access a lot of different sources on the ground using local websites. For instance, after the riot in Papua, there's a lot of videos and photos claiming that it was the Papuans shooting police or law enforcement. There have been photos around the internet, spreading around the internet, saying that this is the bodies of, soldiers or policemen being shot down with arrows or vice versa, and it creates a lot of confusion because there's no way to verify those information when we don't have any internet access. And ordinary citizen, people who are not directly affected by the riot, also find it very difficult to know what really happened without the internet available. So even for their own sake, they cannot access, or ways to get out from the area, or even the nature of the conflict and how dangerous they are, how close they are with the flare point or the hotspot in the area. And for the government itself, it's also a big problem because they cannot reach the public. So it's not a situation where you want to get yourself in when there's no way to communicate. Even important information about the situation on the ground. But the good thing is, after that internet shutdown, we see this huge pushback from civil society. A lot of civil society organizations protested and even filed a lawsuit against the internet shutdown, filed in January 2020 against the president and the Communication and Information Ministry. And it's basically saying that the internet shutdown is illegal. It's not within the limitation principle enshrined in the law, which has been ratified by the Indonesian Parliament. And there's a lot of we also were testifying. One of our fact checkers from Tempo was called as witness in the trial, and we basically saying that with the internet shutdown, we cannot do our job properly as a fact-checking agency for the public. And we won the case. In June 2020, the civil court saying that the policy to slow down internet or ban internet entirely in Papua was illegal. And surprisingly, the government accept that decision. They don't appeal, even though they have an opportunity to appeal the case, but they said that they accept it and will use it to revise their policy around same incident in the future. So for us, I think it's a great achievement to be able to successfully challenge the internet shutdown, but it still is a potential threat that will happen in the future unless we have a more legal, a more robust legal protection that making sure that it will not happen again. Because I think one of the strategy by the government not to appeal is because they don't want this to be strengthened by the higher court or even the Supreme Court, because if that happened, then it's final and binding. But now it's only the first court that say that it's illegal, then they still have rooms to maneuver in that sense. So the government, I think we need to engage the government and still have a lot of homework in making sure the government understand the importance of internet freedom. And one last thing that really, take us aback was last month. We also experienced internet shutdown in Papua, but this time there's no announcement. There is no statement from the government saying that yes, we have blocked the internet as last time, but now the only explanation was there's an incident on the undersea internet cable connecting the internet from the other island to Papua. So the result is the same. And the timing is a bit suspicious because at the time, the police is escalating their military operation, their security operation in the area, and they deploy a lot of new troops in the region to confront the separatist movement. At the same time that happened, the internet is blocked again, but this time the explanation was incident on the internet cables, not deliberate policy from the government. So I think this is a new way to go around this legal regulation, and I think, of course, this is a suspicion because we cannot prove for ourselves that there is an incident on the cable under the sea, because we cannot go there and check for ourselves. So I think that's from my side, and looking forward for the conversation afterwards. Thank you, Salini.
Thanks, Vayu. I think it was really good to listen to all three speakers. And also, Vayu, you talked about civil society putting pressure on the government, the victory that you had about the internet shutdown being declared illegal in Indonesia. And similarly, in Myanmar, we've seen civil society being very active, also people moving to offline tools that can be used to share information even during shutdowns. I wanted to ask Raman at this point that what are some of the strategies that people have adopted in other countries and maybe other regions during internet shutdowns, and how can we ensure that during certain important events, especially during elections, which are so important for democracies, people do have access to credible information and internet shutdowns and network disruptions don't take place?
Thank you, Shalini. I'm very happy to answer that. And in fact, before I go into that question about strategy and how do people react and try to mitigate or circumvent it, I thought I'd just emphasize one point that I think came from those other speakers, is that what shutdowns particularly also do with misinformation is it makes it difficult to signal to people that what you're seeing right now is misinformation, disinformation. And what I mean by that is a fact checker may even determine X picture or message that is being sent or is being spread even perhaps by word of mouth is untrue, but you can't easily spread it, and you can't publicly notify that something is misinformation. Sometimes that's unintentional, and it may not be the intention of government, but it actually does cause harm. Other cases, we must also recognize it might be intentional sometimes by politically connected actors or dominant interests to prevent misinformation from being revealed. But leave that aside, how people responded. I think people have tried to do the effort of trying to circumvent or see other technical ways around that, and there are a variety of mechanisms. There's some more low-tech tools, such as, for example, people sometimes using SIM cards on roaming in countries where the local telecom operator has said that we will not implement the shutdown against roaming customers. I know, for example, that's partly been true in Myanmar to a limited extent, a few other countries as well. But again, that's intermittent. It depends on, say, the telecom operator in the country. And for example, in certain cases, such as Jammu and Kashmir in India in 2018-19, that wasn't an option because they did a full communications blackout. And subsequent to that, they in particular also targeted people who might have been roaming in the state. But again, it varies from country to country. You see others who try to circumvent by using peer-to-peer messaging apps. And what I mean by that are apps such as Fire Chat or others that are basically depend on mesh networking. It means connects from one mobile device to another mobile device using Wi-Fi or other local transmission and not through the cellular towers. I will note there that the use case of that as a circumvention tool has actually been something I would say many people in the Keep It On community are critical of. The data doesn't seem to back up their actual use, including situations like Hong Kong, like Myanmar, like other places. And there's a lot of worry about potential surveillance and vulnerabilities in such platforms. Because remember, the one thing I would say during shutdowns is we know a shutdown is happening. We don't always know the surveillance that may be taking place. And we're particularly journalists and sometimes, unfortunately, even fact checkers, they need to be careful about that. There are other low-tech solutions, or you could say old tech solutions, for example, using radio spectrum broadcasts. I know some people in, again, Myanmar or in other countries have said if something is not available on social media or local messaging, have it broadcast by radio broadcasters regionally or internationally, because they can often still be available, particularly AM spectrum broadcasters. But again, that's limited. It's not as nimble as people would like. But those sort of old school tech solutions are sometimes what we may go to. And the other thing is that there are digital security and other tools that, for example, even our Access Now Digital Security Helpline has been thinking of. I can share, we hope to publish more on this later this month and next month. There are already some great resources from Southeast Asian digital security networks about Myanmar in particular. And I know, the community and a wider network that Setai and others represent or work with have information on digital security tips. But there's more that we can do there. But as a policy person, I keep emphasizing that you will not be able to circumvent or route around a shutdown easily. People may, for example, an independent broadcaster or fact checker may go to an area where shutdown, come back, use, say, a fixed connection to email. But ultimately, in fact, if we focus on circumvention too much, we won't solve the bigger problem, which is that, in my view, and I think the view we could perhaps arrive at after all these discussions and data, is that shutdowns are never acceptable. And we must ensure, whether it's through policymakers, courts, international institutions, or just the force of our popular will or political pressure, that a shutdown is never allowed to occur. But I hope we can focus on that. And again, I'm happy to come back to that later in our discussion.
Yeah, I hope we can definitely focus on that in the region. Uh, Kritika, as a fact checker and as someone who's leading the work of WebCoof, a fact checking group, I wanted to ask you about the misinformation and maybe give a few examples of misinformation that you've seen during the shutdowns, and how have you addressed this kind of misinformation?
So Shalini, one example is something that I gave earlier as well, was a very, very prominent narrative which was created by the government when internet shutdown happened in Jammu and Kashmir, saying that everybody is happy, everything is fine, but that is not the case, because we had our own reporters visiting Jammu and Kashmir, and they got us reports showing that people were not happy. They got us reports from hospitals which showed there were casualties. We had a lot of those reports. So, I mean, of course, since not everybody sitting in Delhi is able to get in touch with people in Jammu and Kashmir, it will become very difficult for you to show that accurate picture. And also, without naming any particular media house or without naming anything, I would say that a large chunk of the media also rallied the government's view. They did also show, they did also show that everything was smooth in the valley, everything was fine in Jammu and Kashmir. So I think that is an example of misinformation, because that is not the whole picture. That didn't reveal the real situation on the ground, and it became difficult unless and also, it became difficult for reporters to file report from Jammu and Kashmir and send it here, because it was very difficult for them to send it because there was a shutdown. Or maybe they had access to low bandwidth internet. It wasn't as simple. So I think that is a very prominent example that I can think of. Other than that, even during the anti-CAA NRC protests, which started in December 2019, and they snowballed into riots that we saw in Delhi in February 2022. We have seen examples. We have seen how misinformation is targeting a particular community, how narratives are built, targeting protesters, protesting students, activists. So there are ample examples, and at least I haven't seen evidence which supports this argument, which says that shutdowns have actually helped in curbing misinformation. So while that could be an argument put forth by the government, I do not think that is backed by data, or maybe that's not backed by enough data. So yeah, that's what I would like to say.
I'd like to ask you about Mido. Mido is also a fact-checking group, and you've been fact-checking misinformation related to several issues, including the elections and the political instability in Myanmar. What has been the example of the experience of Mido during shutdowns? And if you can give some examples of the kinds of misinformation that you've seen during shutdowns, and how have you addressed that?
Yes, during this shutdown, we continue to actually see a lot of, harmful propaganda that, that at scale. And also, we can also see that, it's actually very linked to, what the propaganda that we are seeing on social media, linking to the military TV channels, and also, all this, how propaganda and, the state, official, the so-called official media that the military back are linked together. So this is actually very interesting to see. And also during the internet shutdown, we see a lot of all this propaganda and misinformation. But one thing very notable that we still remember is, during the first month of the coup, when, the total internet shutdown had happened, a misinformation, about, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi being released from her arrest came up, and people are actually, messaging to each other about it, sending SMS. And it's a very coordinated message, because, suddenly, people are receiving on their phones. Some, people are receiving calls from their friends. And then as Mido, because we are, we also have a fact check team. People tend to call us to, help ask us to confirm about that news. And then it's actually very difficult for us to confirm it, because, because we actually don't have internet. It's very, hard for us and dangerous for us to call, risky for us to call people who are actually close to, the Aung San Suu Kyi or the government. But we managed to confirm that it is not true. So we don't know how to actually pass that news, because there's no internet. So, and then at the same time, people from like the neighborhoods are celebrating. There's even like fireworks, and, we even hear all of these things because people are celebrating. And then, what we have to do is, we have to do like very community-based fact checking at that time. So, our fact checkers, we just, we just had to go out to the balcony and then shout about, okay, this is not true, don't believe it, just please pass this message to whoever you see. And then we started sending SMS and all of this. So it really take a very, like a night and a day to actually, verify, on that information. So that's, that show that, misinformation, some disinformation somehow make its way coordinatedly. But then on the other hand, our fact check group, we had difficulties in actually trying to, verify and combat it, and, and to reach it to the people. So that's very like a notable experience that we have for the Myanmar case.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very powerful experience, Thai. And I remember when the coup happened in Myanmar in February, we were all trying to look for credible information from Myanmar and trying to look at independent media sites, some of which had been blocked, some social media platforms had been blocked. So putting out information, factual information in this manner is really great. I'd like to ask you, Vayu, now about Indonesia and something similar that happened during the elections in Indonesia, when you saw social media platforms not being available when the election results were being declared. So what was the experience of fact-checking of Tempo and Check Factor during that time?
Yeah, I think first of all, the government claimed that the policy was in place to prevent misinformation, right? Because just after midnight, the election was announced at 7 or 8 p.m., if I'm not mistaken. Then after midnight, we start seeing riots everywhere in the capital. And nearing down, we start receiving a lot of photos and videos about clashes between the rioters or demonstrators with the police, and pictures of bodies claiming to be victims of the police violence. So what really happened is not the government trying to prevent misinformation, but the government trying to prevent the public to know that there is victims from the public that was being sought by the police enforcement, by the law enforcement. That's what happened, because the riots got out of control, and the government, then the police start taking uh, you know measures to prevent it, and that's result in a lot of victims, people being shot, and etc. That's the information that the governments want to prevent people from knowing. So there is no disinformation at the time, but of course these videos and photos needs to be checked. The slowdown of social media access made it's difficult for fact checkers to know exactly where that comes from, because if you have Facebook or YouTube still exists, you can track the source, you can track the users who spread it in the first place. You can track the location of the place from the users using the analytics provided by the social media. But if that's gone, and people spreading that through websites or email, just being sending the link, and it becomes more difficult for fact checkers to verify where the origin of that particular video or photo, because there's no data about the source. The other thing that also happened is because there's a slowdown of social media use, but only in the capital, we start seeing disinformation, unverified information spread or share widely outside of the capital. And that make the tension becomes more national. A conflict that should be localized in one city become more widespread, because the limitation of social media application is only in the capital, and people outside the capital still can access it, but they don't get information or fact check informations about what really happened.
We'll be wrapping up this session in about 5 to 7 minutes from now. And I wanted to ask Kritika, Tai, and Vayu to maybe talk about your vision and your idea as activists, journalists, and fact checkers in the region. What kind of information flow is necessary, and how would you prepare for such situations of shutdowns in the future? Kritika, would you like to start?
Sure. What I want to say is that we completely acknowledge the fact that there is a lot of misinformation, and of course, the government needs to act. But what we also need to acknowledge is the fact that maybe internet shutdown is not the solution. You need to step back and take a look at the larger problem, and we need a solution to fix that problem, and not a shutdown or a ban on or a ban of any sort. So number one, so I don't think so that is the solution. So this argument that internet shutdown is for national security or is for curbing the spread of misinformation, at least when it comes to misinformation, I don't think so that is a permanent solution, or that is a strong enough reason to say that this is the reason why there is an internet shutdown. Number two, I feel that what happens in a situation when you impose a shutdown, the situation is anyway volatile. There is a lot of information. I'm not saying misinformation or disinformation, I'm saying there is a lot of unverified information. It might be true, it might be wrong. So you need to give that time to people to process that information, to know what is right and what is wrong. In that process, when you shut down the internet, when you say that you cannot access these apps or these messaging apps, or you put a ban on landline or whatever, you make it even more difficult. And that is when people start relying on rumors, when that is when people start believing whatever they're hearing. That could be word of mouth, that could be anything. So I think that is something which needs to be addressed. And number three is, I think, as uh, misinformation also goes offline, because of course when there is a shutdown, we acknowledge the fact that misinformation is just not on platforms, it's also through word of mouth. So if misinformation goes offline, I think facts also need to go offline. So since you're asking for a future view, I think one thing, individually, in my opinion, I think what is important is to also amplify the work that all of us are doing, or the fact checkers are doing. As a community, we need to amplify these facts offline so that they're able to reach a larger audience, maybe in their language, in local languages, not just English, Hindi, or whichever language we are producing our content in. So yeah, I think those are three major points that I would like to make.
Thanks, Kritika. Tai, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I completely agree with Kritika on the point that, shutting down the internet is by no way a mean to curb misinformation, and because it's also not, justifiable as well. So, this is, this message should be, very clear, and also we have to have like evidence, have data to actually, we need data to support that as well, because in Myanmar during the previous NLD government, which we which can be regarded as starting of a democratic government, we had one of the longest internet shutdown, and also doing this military coup, the military are using this switch to easily oppress the people. So so this shouldn't happen, this couldn't happen. So I think that we should have more data to back that this is not a solution to the to the problem. So I agree on that. And another one is internet shutdowns are, it's just one part of a complex system of government control. There are also a way of surveillance, arrest, and all of these regulations on access. So I think that this should also be clearly be aware, and also have enough tactics for us to actually work on that as well. So yes, so that is just what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Tai. Vayu, any last comments on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Kritika and Tai just said. But just to add one point, maybe that we need to find or thinking about alternative internet infrastructure. There's a lot of technology that is available for civil society to, just to be ready when there's a big potential, if there's a huge potential that it can happen in a region where tension is high or conflict prone region. I think it's something that the civil society needs to think about, really creating this alternative infrastructure of internet access. Because if you remove the internet, there's no way we can control the government. There's no way we can access what really happened on the ground. And that is a deadly recipe for human rights violation, for a lot of wrongdoings and crimes committed. So I think it's paramount we start thinking about that if the variable on the ground shows that it's necessary.
Yeah. It's quite clear from what all of you are saying, and from our own experience, we know that internet shutdowns are just not acceptable. And whether we're working as journalists or fact checkers, it's really difficult for function. And for citizens, it becomes a life-threatening situation. So Raman, I'd like you to end this by sharing your final thoughts on this. What can we all do as a community working on information and credible information, online information in the region? What can we all do?
And I think the answer to that, Shalini, is we will try and make some things better. We will try and figure out ways to circumvent alternative technologies. But I think we now know this is a problem. And I think in our voices, as people involved in the Asian journalism, fact-checking communities, we need to speak in the region in one voice and in our local languages in our countries to say, hey, there is a problem of misinformation which policymakers recognize and are wanting more action. Fact checkers are doing that job, hard job already. Shutdowns don't just make our job harder, it makes spreads more information and makes it much worse. This is something that predates the digital era but is much worse today and people expect more. So do not issue a shutdown. It makes our situation far more problematic, and we therefore believe and should put one voice that in 2021 shutdowns need to be recognized as one of the worst not impediments for fact checking, and perhaps one of the worst perpetrators of misinformation and disinformation. And we need that voice out clear in our local language, in our countries, in national capitals, in the region, and of course internationally as well, because I think it's not just to the West or other actors, it's to us who work in this, who stay in our countries, who are trying to make them better places, to be able to say this here and have recognition of that. And I think we're well placed because fact checkers are doing the hard work already. And I think they can put that voice out more clearly, saying this is not acceptable. And slowly and slowly, we will win this fight. We know the problem and hopefully we'll get to the solution.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I hope that next year, when we have the report on internet shutdowns, we see fewer shutdowns and we are all able to fight this together. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to all the panelists for your thoughts and experiences.